Welcome to a conversation with Joseph Boardman, former president and CEO of Amtrak, America's Railroad, and Barry Melnkovic, executive vice president and chief human capital officer, who was recently named the 2016 Human Resources Executive of the Year. I'm Ken Freeman, Allen Questrom Professor and Dean at Boston University Questrom School of Business. Joe and Barry, we're very pleased to have you with us this afternoon. Perhaps we could start with an understanding of your personal story. Joe, would you mind giving us a short, firm bio, if you will, in terms of how you came to lead America's Railroad?
Well, it's probably a longer story than I can talk about, but it really, I think it really started in college. I went to college right after getting out of the military back in 1970 and started driving bus on campus to help pay for college, and really got interested in the transportation business. My wife says anything with a motor and wheels, and I love it. So from there, I went on to become a transit manager in my hometown, Rome, New York. Moved to a bigger town, Utica, and then on down to Binghamton, and my own company. Then became Commissioner of Transportation for New York State. From there, Federal Railroad Administrator and Amtrak.
How about that? And the process for becoming the CEO of Amtrak is maybe a little bit different than it might be in a public company, as an example. Is that correct?
Well, it is. There's a lot of political interest. While it's not directly appointed by the president, you certainly want to make sure that they want you over on Pennsylvania Avenue. So that's a responsibility of the board chair and others to determine that. And so, as I was already the Federal Railroad Administrator, which was interesting, I was that for President Bush. When President Obama came in, there was a support for me, especially from the Vice President, to continue at Amtrak.
Fantastic. And Barry, how about yourself?
For me, the journey started really through my dad, who was in the coal mines at age 11 and a steel worker. Mom was a homemaker in Wimber, Pennsylvania. And he was a union guy till the day he died, and so that kind of brought me into this whole notion of people and work. And then I would see firsthand when companies closed what that did to communities. And that was something that drove me into the HR field. How do you have productivity and keep in mind kind of a social responsibility as well, yet there are times you need to make hard decisions. So for me, I like to say I've been with a lot of market-leading companies, and one of my learnings is that every company's had their own story to success. There is no one right way. So it's been a real growth opportunity, and part of that journey for me is it seems like most companies have tried to get me out of HR and do other things, and sometimes I've done that, but I've always come back kind of the people side, on the talent side of the equation.
And if I'm correct, you started out in the numbers, if I recall correctly, in the control function perhaps at one point?
Well, when I was working for PPG Industries, I wore a dual hat of controllership for about a $300 million business, as well as the HR director role for a facility. So I think at that time they picked about 5 HR people to prototype kind of transitioning into the finance role, and that, can HR people kind of do kind of thing, and a few of us apparently did well, and that worked out really, really well.
And at Amtrak here, you're focused on lean enterprise solutions in addition to the HR function.
Yeah, so complete tribute to Mr. B. We looked at lean enterprise solutions, Lean Six Sigma, through the eyes of the customer. How would we take out waste, improve service, and really start creating more of a focus of a culture of waste elimination within Amtrak.
Joe, what led you to conclude, as you became CEO, that you wanted to put an intense focus on employee engagement?
Well, number one, coming in, I wanted that, because one of the issues at Amtrak had always been customer service, certainly, and there was a very tough relationship between management and the union, and all railroads are highly unionized, and I had a lot of experience with both sides of being a tough side to the union and not so tough. Mm-hmm. And in particular, how do you get your employees to treat the customers well if they're not being treated well? And so for me, there needed to be a way in the door. I used safety as the issue that we really wanted to change, using a behavioral-based safety program. But that was what really kicked it off.
Yeah. So you searched for that person who might come into the company and help transform Amtrak together. Barry, what led you to conclude this was the place you wanted to be?
You know, I've asked that a lot, and some people were still very surprised I ever ended up at Amtrak. Never thought I would be at Amtrak. And I shared this story a number of times, but it simply goes like this. I uniquely had a couple of opportunities all at once. And I called up Dave Brown, who was the now retired CEO of Owens Corning, and I was on Dave's leadership team there, and he remains a coach and mentor. And I said, I've got several opportunities. One's Amtrak, but I said, what do you think of these opportunities? He said, was there any CEO that led with safety? Because that was a value to Dave and one that he knew was important to me. And I said, one, Joe Boardman and Amtrak. And with that, it was Amtrak. And so for me, it became very much a values-based decision. Of course, when I got there, Joe said, hey, I can't pay you what you're used to making, but can you come for me and the mission and the country? So I like to say I came for Boardman and country and have never looked back.
How about that?
Best rides of my career.
So when you first arrived at Amtrak, you likely needed to do a diagnosis, over 20,000 employees. How did you go about articulating the plan for prominence, if you will, as it relates to human capital?
And it was no one silver bullet. Pretty much followed a model of strategy, structure, talent, execution with a lot of outreach. And so we had data available. We had several external audits that were done that pinpointed a lot of our woes, certainly meeting with Mr. B and the leadership team, meeting with employees, meeting with the board, and triangulating what we would do that would advance the strategic plan first. And so it was just a lot of roll up your sleeves and go after it after that and segment and prioritize what we needed to do to close those gaps.
Was the board with you from day one, Joe, or was this something where there was a repetition reduces resistance, perhaps buy-in process that was required?
No, the board was with me, and I think that it was very difficult for the board to understand where they needed to go. And so I've had 3 different boards since I've been there, they're kind of evolving. But this board, especially the early board, was really interested in making some changes, and we rapidly made changes. We've had really 3 strategic plans. The first strategic plan really was in 2009, a little bit before Barry got there, and it was written in, I think, 3 pages that I wrote, because here's what I'm going to do, here's where I'm going. Mm-hmm. Nobody could agree on a strategic plan to begin with, because we were all over the map. Mm-hmm. It wasn't until some other folks joined us that we really began to put together a structured strategic plan, and then even revised it and moved forward from there. So I don't want to get off where you were going, but it was a good, strong support which really moved the dial and has still moved the dial. Most recently, we were talking a little bit before, was the next generation Acela was in that 3-page plan. Major.
Fantastic. And how did you connect with the employees to really understand at the gut level what potentially issues and concerns might be as you were striving to advance the enterprise?
A lot of it was, we did focus groups, we did Kaizen events. A lot of it was just me riding the train and hanging out with the crews and the customers, which just loved that this was a B2C business. And being on trains and of course, I'm wearing a suit and you have a lanyard and an ID badge and people think you're running the train. Big mistake. I have nothing to do with running the train. But people would ask questions, and it was great to be able to call up colleagues and get an instant answer for folks. And then that would be kind of worked into some of our conversations. Mr. Boardman had us all adopt a line. Mine was a Texas Eagle as well, to understand intimately what the issues were around that line of business and what you could do to improve things. We did, Survey Monkey. We did a lot of informal surveys as well, and we do some things through sales and marketing. Our marketing department, we do an SSI survey relative to how each department services one another through the eyes of employees as well. After that, simply writing out the action plans and making sure you do something different.
Follow through and do what you said you would do. The passenger railroading industry is a mature industry, we might say, in many respects. Been around a long time. Amtrak having been created in 1971, but predecessor railroads, of course, providing service, New York Central, Penn Central, Burlington Northern, and the rest. So you brought it all together, the Amtrak enterprise brought it together. How does one take what I might argue is a fairly mature industry compared to many others? How do you light the fuse? How do you light the fuse among your employee base who might say, you know, we know how to do this. We've been doing this for a long, long time. We have competition, but in passenger railroading, in terms of long distance, we don't have competition. How does one motivate? How does one light that fuse in the employee base for change?
Well, you know, lighting the fuse never stops. I mean, that's part of the issue that we all deal with today in every area. As Barry was talking, I was thinking about Barry. What makes Barry really move the dial? And sure, he bought into the vision, but he had his own vision, a magnanimous way of understanding where he needed to go and how he needed to get there, and he used the tools that he had available. But he had something else that's critically important today to light anybody's fuse in especially a service business like Amtrak really is, and that is he had humility, because he was there knowing he didn't have the answers. He had to get those answers from the folks that were really doing the job. And if you're going to get the answers in this world, it has to be real humility, not a false one, because that you get derision and contempt coming from those kinds of things. And Barry bought in. He was real.
Yeah.
And people could tell he was real.
Yeah. So that must come from your upbringing, or did you learn it on the job, Barry? That's such an essential leadership skill.
Well, I want to thank Mr. B for that tribute, but I would say I just simply rode his coattails as well, in all honesty, because you're looking at Amtrak, and you know, my heart goes out to the employees, the 30, 40-year, the multi-generational railroaders that make this thing work with funding threats or no funding, and people are always seemingly having us in the crosshairs. You almost don't get credit for any good things that you do. And so from a burning platform model of change, there was no burning platform, because the employees literally had heard every reason to change under somebody else. As I used to do a lot in labor negotiations and do it now at Amtrak, but I was much younger then in career, and the union rep looked at me across the table after I made my pitch. I thought it was brilliant. He looked at me and just said, "Same circus, different clowns." I've never forgotten that. And a lot of times that I went out and would talk to people and make an appeal for change and say, "We got this strategy. Well, we've talked about that. We're going to run like a business. Well, there's another flavor there." And there was just always something. But what was a constant was the employee respect for Joe Boardman. And when we started launching different changes, I would simply appeal in person to groups of employees and say, "I'm asking you one more time to believe, and it's because Joe Boardman is asking you to believe." And that respect carried a lot of weight, and it certainly wasn't me, it was him.
Tremendous team effort, tremendous leadership and support from the very top. As you look back over your 5 years at Amtrak to this point, are there particular areas that you're particularly proud of in terms of having helped to move the needle in advancing the vision for Amtrak?
I'm just happy to be, playing a small part on a winning team, and Amtrak is in fact a winning team. If you look at the success record of Joe Boardman under his leadership, record revenue and ridership, improved safety, highest customer satisfaction ever, 81.3. Hopefully we can announce that now, but it's never been done, up 4 points over last year. The loan that you mentioned, it was his vision when I got there, saying we need to look down the field very quickly and get this in place now, because this takes time and the fleet is aging. There was no other bandwagon out there. It was him being the cheerleader for all of this. Debt reduction, debt reduction cut by 2/3. I mean, for what he got paid, as I used to tease him, I mean, it was just like, if you were having this track record in a true for-profit situation, why, I mean, it'd be a much different financial picture.
Sure.
But what I learned from Joe Boardman was this notion of humility and sense of mission. It was never about the money for him. It was about creating common good for the country and running an organization as efficiently as it could be.
Barry mentioned the large loan that's been really very innovative, creative, targeting infrastructure improvements. Amtrak seems from the outside looking in to have been fairly cash-starved from Congress as a supporter in terms of providing funding. But it seems like maybe there's a breakthrough that's taken place recently as you are modernizing the Excella Express fleet and going further.
Got to add, lowest adjusted loss in company history.
All right,
Well,
fantastic.
Barry's, making me blush over here. But the thing that I don't think gets seen Ken, is that it isn't just this. I mean, this high-speed one, I see Chuck Schumer's got all the ads out, and
Yes, he does.
about how he's improving high-speed rail, and I sit there when I see him and say, okay, Chuck, I understand. You're being reelected. But the reality is, before we even did this, before this was done, we had just replaced the line haul equipment, all the locomotives, all the electric locomotives built in California by Siemens, 70 of them. And that was a loan from the same program that we got the high speed from. But there's not as much sexiness in a 135 mile an hour train as there is than one that can go 220.
Yeah.
Because this piece of machinery that we've got or will have out there now in 3 years will be able to do that if the rest of the infrastructure is invested in.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a problem.
Yeah.
So we can talk about the equipment, and we handled that.
Mm-hmm.
And we've got some perhaps improvements that might happen with a new tunnel going into Manhattan. But the rest of the infrastructure needs to be fixed to make this happen. And we're the only country in the world that thinks it can do high-speed rail without making the proper investments.
Yeah.
So that's something that still has to happen.
And there are local conflicts, aren't there, or not conflicts necessarily as much as who has priority and who has precedent? I know in the New York Metro area, as an example, sometimes there's the Metropolitan Transit Authority and who owns the track and who has preference. That seems like an incredibly challenging leadership activity to try to really create that appropriate balance to enable higher speed travel.
Well, it is, and it is difficult, but the reality is, for the most part, the federal government can do what it needs to do, mm-hmm. and everything else can be moved out of the way and make it happen. It's just that they're not ready to do so, but they're not ready to do so on the highways that need to be repaired, and the water systems and the sewer systems and all the things, even the next generation air traffic control system. The ability to invest in infrastructure for the future has really fallen on deaf ears because they believe that it costs too much to do it. Well, it's going to cost them leadership of the world if they don't do it.
Very, very important point. Employees, if I were to ask an employee today, what have you seen? What's changed that says to you Amtrak has entered the next level of employee engagement? What kind of adjectives or words, what might they describe in terms of what they've seen that's changed, that's made their world that much better, and in the end, the customer experience that much better as well?
Well, something's working on a neutral level. We placed on the Forbes Best Employers list, mm-hmm. and then the first year it was out, and then jumped 81 points the second year.
Congratulations, that's huge.
So again, no one silver bullet, but we definitely have a reinvestment in our people. People are feeling it, I think, more on the training and development side that historically, due to funding concerns, has kind of come and gone and come again and come and gone again at Amtrak. Under Mr. Boardman's leadership, Joe's made sure that we've had a consistency here these number of years, and so people can feel that. We work and need to continue to work on the notion of fair treatment throughout the company. It is interesting, I'm new to the railroad industry. In some ways, I would say the them and us attitude that historically has been out there can still be there, and so it just takes some time to melt that. Mm-hmm. So I do think, though, again, when Joe got there, and this way predates me, but he came in as CEO, and we've got 13 unions. He had none of them under contract, and they hadn't had a contract for years. So everyone was put under contract. We've kind of built from there on the agreement side and on the non-agreement side. Again, we've been very transparent with our employees in terms of where we're going and why. Development plans are, we're trying to get better at performance management. We've implemented teaching leaders the difference between good, better, best performance, and to be candid and be known for quality of conversation. Still a lot more work to do there, but I would say that clearly is something that has been very different. We've got compensation differentiation. Again, more work needs to get there, mm-hmm. But that hadn't been ever at Amtrak. I mean, we used to pay merit increases even if you got a did not meet years ago, and that ended. And so, again, no silver bullet, just a lot of things. Now, some would say, it's been drinking from a fire hose as well. And in my particular point of view is, but this is what companies do, and particularly high-performing companies. Mm-hmm. The fact that we don't have the muscle memory yet is probably our biggest hurdle, because a lot of this, we're really probably 3, maybe 4 years, 2 to 4 years in putting these programs solidly in place. But we made so much progress so fast, people say, how in the world did you do that? And a lot of it was using ADCAR. We have one change management model, and we apply that with quite a bit of rigor, as well as project management plans on the HC side. So all of that kind of conspires together in a good way to help influence change and make it more acceptable to employees.
You made a number of changes, as you've outlined. Trust seems to be at the core of all the changes you've made. And as you look forward, when do you think you'll get to the point of having been moving from rapid implementation phase to saying that this is truly the new culture that is here forevermore for Amtrak?
Well, I'd like to think that we're probably flipping that switch right now. I think we've got a lot of the foundational things in place. Clearly there are gaps, but there are some real incredible stories in terms of, I think we can match up pretty well with any top performing company in a lot of areas. And that's not trying to be unhumble, but it's a lot of hard work. So, you know, and what we need to do is have the consistency at the board level, and Wick Moorman now as CEO and his vision to have that sustained, because if you look at the history of Amtrak, there have been some great programs and processes in place that just were not sustained. And that remains the big ticket question, sustainability 10 years out.
Yeah, there's nervousness about that right now.
And you mentioned earlier, Joe, that you've had 3 different boards, I believe, during your tenure as CEO. Does the board completely turn over? And they're appointed, if I recall correctly.
No, but yes, they're appointed 5-year terms. They used to be at the end of 5-year terms, they went away. Now they're held over until they're either reappointed or somebody else is appointed in their position. I think that Barry's right. I think there's, I'm hearing, you know, just they don't know the new CEO yet. What is he going to do? I mean, for me, early on, it was killing fiefdoms and making sure that people understand that there's real silos here. And I think the best piece for me is I got from a mid-level, knowledgeable guy here in my retirement a card that said, I understand about the silos. You're right. We're going to continue to work in that area, getting rid of the silos. Now, some silos, you know, are almost impossible. But if you hate one group and hate the other, they don't talk to each other, and we don't get the on-time performance. We don't get the equipment fixed. We don't get...
Hurts the customer.
That's right, hurts the customer.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of things that Barry's done, hasn't been able to talk about, is learning council and all the things that people want to talk about. And then I go out and listen, because I'm not always a quick buy-in, am I, about whether this is going to work or not. I want to hear it from the people that are actually attending the ACE program or the management program, and I want to hear, what do you think? Is it helping you or isn't it helping you? So,
importance of communications,
yes.
Very powerful. Downward, upward, sideways, and in between. As Joe, you've just recently retired. The transition, CEO to CEO, often in companies and enterprises can be extremely challenging, not only for the individuals coming in and leaving, but also the colleagues that continue on with transition and continuity of mission. How have you handled that? How difficult is that?
I think it's gone all right, but I haven't really been as much a part of it as I initially anticipated. I think it was really more the board communicating with the new CEO, because they want to go perhaps in a little bit of a different direction and didn't need my biases. And I understand that. So I've known Wick Moorman since 2005, when he became the CEO of Norfolk Southern. And he was one of the people I would turn to for advice myself, because I wasn't a long-term railroader. He and Matt Rose probably were the 2 people that would give me the railroad advice more than anybody else.
So a condition of respect really helps inform an effective transition, it seems. We teach ethics in our programs here at Questrom School of Business. In fact, the very first course we teach is about ethics and effective business judgment. Have you, Barry, in your career ever encountered an ethical dilemma where it really tested you, where you really had to go back to your values? And could you maybe describe an ethical dilemma you might have faced and how you contended with it? Because we sense that our students, and certainly from personal experience, within 2 weeks of graduation, we will likely encounter our first workplace ethical dilemma. Is there an ethical dilemma you might care to share with us?
Yeah, unfortunately, I have a great one that I wish I never had to face. Because what you find sometime is the right decision isn't always the easiest decision. You can maybe look at that in a vacuum, but there was a large part of my career working for companies in places where there was certainly always the bright side of the line of the law. You just wouldn't cross that. Then all of a sudden you can find yourself in conversations where a controller comes down and says, "Hey, I was just in a meeting, and I'm kind of told that if it's cheaper to pay the fine, kill the fish," kind of thing, and or exiting business somewhere in the world, and the way you're going to do that clearly was not necessarily cricket, and so I had to take a look because you're a team player, all this good stuff, a lot of money at risk for yourself as well, have a family to think about, and yet you have this little birdie in your back mind saying, this isn't right, this isn't you. And so in that case, I sought quietly outside counsel, listened to counsel, and made sure people knew where my position was when I was in meetings, where certain aspects were covered. And so I would hope your students don't have to ever face that, but it wouldn't be uncommon if they
unusual.
do.
Yeah.
And I can remember being a student and being in an ethics kind of class, and I can remember someone posing a question, and I'm thinking, probably pretty cockily, "Oh, I would never do that." I would just tell them where to go or something. Well, I didn't quite do that either.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
The special
tough
moments
situations.
takes courage to really head towards the true north, if you will.
Well, it does, but it also level set me, and it also made sure I wanted to know what the values of anyone I was working with really were at the end of the day, and not just the stated values. And with a leader like Joe Boardman, I never would ever have to
No worries.
be in that conversation again.
Well, thank you for your comments in that respect. A final question for each of you. For the next generation, for students that are going through their collegiate experiences, contemplating what they're going to do with their lives, professionally and personally. Joe, would you have a piece of advice you might share with the next generation, if you will?
I do. It's all about their character in the end. It truly is. Leadership is character. If you're going to lead and you believe something seriously, whether it's a magnanimous vision for the future and an understanding that you don't have all the answers, and that takes a while for people to understand. The ability to forgive, I think, is critically important. And when you have those things, and when you begin to understand the values and the character that it's all about, you'll do fine. But if you don't have them and you try to make them up, it doesn't work.
So
you
easy.
won't be a leader.
Thank you. Barry?
I would just say go forth and do great things. Have fun at it. And there are times I'm probably too wired to, focus in that way. And I go back to a Dave Brown conversation at Owens Corning when, he was giving me feedback, and I said, well, what can I do better? He said, can you just have fun? And I'm like, well, putting competition out of business and growing, that's fun. I'm telling you just to have fun. I'm like, I got it. And I went back to my team and I said, dang, they said, what happened? I said, Dave told me to have fun, so we're going to have fun.
Wow.
And I tried to flip that gear ever since.
Fantastic. The importance of character, the importance of having fun. It's very difficult to go to work when one isn't having fun doing it. And I sense from both of you that you've been having great fun taking Amtrak to the next level.
I always have fun with Barry. That's the truth.
And I've been forgiven a lot by him.
Oh, have you?
so-
Well, that's important. Forgiveness matters too. Indeed it does. We've been in conversation about the transformation of Amtrak with Joe Boardman and Barry Melnkovic. Thank you for joining us, and thank you so very much for the engaging and inspirational conversation.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Dean.